Hey everybody, welcome back to D&J's Epic Quest. Just Derek here tonight, and I've got author Luke Tarzian with me. First episode of 2025 here, um, recording anyways. So, how are you doing tonight, Luke?
I'm good. A little tired from work. Just trying to get back in the swing of things, but good for the most part, man. How about yourself?
Not doing too bad. Just yeah, it's Friday night and not really much going on for me. So, thank you for, it was pretty short notice putting this together. The timing worked out. I'm glad it did. So, thank you for that.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So I just finished your book, um, Adjacent Monsters, which is I guess kind of comprised of three books really, or two books and a novella. I guess I'm not really sure how you would classify it, but um, yeah, I was really hooked from the first paragraph in the first story. I read that and I was like, holy shit, I I got to keep going with this now. I don't know if you remember that first paragraph, how much of that sticks in your mind, but man, that was an
Yeah, no,
opening for a book that I don't know that I've had read anything like that before.
I remember the opening for that very vividly because it took me probably I want to say three or four starts to actually get to that. I think I had written Parable as a very quick short story initially, just to kind of get the idea on page. Because I was originally going to put it into a short story collection, which never panned out. And then I decided there was some more stuff I could do with it. In the initial short story, it was just from Rona's point of view. But then I expanded it to include Bear. Um, but yeah, I remember it took probably a good 4 or 5 weeks for me to actually get that first paragraph down. So I'm
Uh,
glad it stuck the landing.
yeah, it totally did. It was just it set the hooks in, and I mean, I wanted more. It was just brutal. Um, I, I've I've talked to I was on Fantasy for the Ages podcast, and I was talking to Jim, the host, about the book, and I wasn't finished at that point, but I challenged him just to read that first page and like not want to keep reading. Um, just I loved it. I loved it. It was dark, it was brutal, and it yeah, just totally set the tone. But um, I think I want to try to keep things spoiler-ish free as much as I can. um, just so I guess for a broader audience, somebody's maybe doesn't want to read it if or listen if there's spoilers and that type of thing. Also, I might have kind of have a hard time. I feel like um, trying to spoil things. I guess the only thing I could spoil and I'll kind of keep it quiet is just the characters are maybe more than what they appear. Is maybe how I would word it. Uh,
Yeah, that's a pretty good description, I would say.
so, but what I guess I'm curious what started this idea for you to want to write these three different stories? I guess like when I read them, um, what's the short story World Reaper Odyssey? Sorry, I'm kind of blanking on the name right now.
Yeah, no, that was it.
It was that actually the first one that you had written then, even though it's the third one in the
Yeah,
book.
so yeah, the journey to get to basically the final product is really kind of back and forth. So all the way back in, I want to say 2016, I had written a novella called shit. I can't even I can't remember the name. But I had
I
written
know
this
you
novella.
had it in the little afterword.
Yeah, I had written this novella and submitted it to Fantasy. science fiction magazine, I think, and gotten some really good feedback. Ultimately, did not sell the story, so I just kind of played with it for a while and then just threw it to the wayside. Um, After I published Vultures in 2019, I wanted to work on the sort of prequel story, and I had wanted to do a story for Bear's character specifically. And so that's sort of how I got into the mindset for Parable. But as I was writing, I knew I wanted to get a little crazy with it, and I was reading the initial novella that I had written and thought for the sequence that I was doing, hey, this stuff is kind of nuts and it kind of works with what I'm doing, so I will incorporate bits and pieces of that into the story. So I would say a good chunk of that initial novella made it into Parable. And when it came time for me to put the omnibus together, I knew that I still had that initial story, and it seemed to fit the broader narrative of dreams within dreams. So I revised that just to sort of make it relevant to the rest of the story. And I guess, the rest is history, as people say.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I read that and it felt, and like, I'm not criticizing it. I'm not saying it was bad, but it didn't have the same feel as the other two. Um, like they're like maybe like your stride wasn't quite fully there yet, maybe, or something like that. Um,
Yeah,
it just
that's a pretty good way of putting it. It felt more just to include it, just kind of like a bonus thing, like, hey, this is maybe something else that could have potentially happened, but it wasn't necessarily canon per se to the actual events.
gotcha. I really liked there was a scene in there that I really liked where the character's walking, it comes across this character walking in like the field, and she's, oh, I'll take you to the lake to get some water, and then she's in the water, and then the knife is in her hand, and then her blood is in the water, and then it's like she wakes up somewhere else. It was a really good visual for me. I like that a lot.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of experimentation going into basically all three stories in the omnibus.
So you put this together. It was with Cabin from Silverstones. I mean, that was the idea then, right? To do like a special edition for Silverstones.
Yeah, exactly. So it was basically a oh my God, I'm blanking on the word, a exclusive edition for it.
Okay. Yeah, that's where I had first heard of you. I hadn't heard of you before that, and we were talking to him, and that was something he had said he wanted to do more of, is more like special editions, and he had done one with you, and then so I picked it up after that, not knowing anything about it, and now I've just recently read it. But um, yeah, just your writing style, your I guess prose would be the word. I really enjoyed it. Really resonated with me. It worked. It painted a really good picture for me while I was reading your book. And I've not read like, a ton of stuff. Um, I've been trying to read mostly indie. Our show we do Malazan, which is obviously not that, but um, I was, when I was reading this, I was just so impressed, and I was curious, like, did you know you wanted to go the indie route? Like, I reading this, I felt like it could be traditionally published, and I don't know if you just didn't want to do that, or if there was other challenges with that, but I thought it was that good.
So when I started writing, probably back in high school, my goal had always been to get traditionally published. And I think one of the first books I wrote, I want to say maybe it was the third that I'd worked on, I'd finished, I'd submitted to a handful of agents, got a couple of full requests that never really amounted to anything. So when I switched, and it was a more of a young adult fantasy that I had been working on at that point. So when I switched to a more adult audience, went through the same step, wrote the book, polished it, sent it off to agents. nothing really seemed to stick. And this is back when Vultures was part of a standalone called Shadow Twins. And when I went into probably the third or fourth revision of it and decided to actually split it up into multiple books, at that point, I had sort of already started considering the self publishing route just because I wanted to have more control with the art. I didn't want to necessarily be handicapped by writing shorter because the general consensus was if you're writing adult fantasy, agents really won't give a shit about anything under 80,000 words. I don't know if that still holds true, but that was just the message that was going around at that point. Um, and I also I wanted more control as far as the art direction went. So yeah, that's sort of how I got into the whole self-publishing thing. It was just kind of I'd been in the trenches for probably almost 10 years at that point and was getting a bit tired of it. So I figured try something new.
Gotcha. It's always interesting to hear somebody's journey through that process. Like, I mean, I have no idea what that's like, so I'm always curious about what that looks like for somebody. Um, but this was not. This is the only book I've read by you. I've got Vultures, House of Mirror be showing up sometime. Um, but this was not the first thing that you wrote, then, correct? Or not the first published thing?
That's correct. So Parable ended up being the second book that I published.
Okay.
And that was, I want to say, maybe a year after Vultures came out. So they came out pretty close to each other.
Vultures. So I guess did I go in the right order with things? Should I have read Vultures first, or does it not really matter? Because that's tied into like the same world, isn't it?
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter what order you read it in. And I wrote Parable and Requiem specifically as standalones, but part of a duology. So you could read it in either order. It wouldn't really matter. It would just more surprises, I guess, if you read it chronologically. And the same thing for Vultures. You could read that independent of the other two and vice versa.
But like when I read Vultures, there'll probably be things that I recognize or can pick up on because I've read Parable and the other story.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Um, just one of my thoughts that I had from Parable, just this idea. I really love the idea of consciousness having like a different name from the person. It seemed really unique to me, and just I was like, are you arguing with that entity or is it just yourself? And it just kind of felt like some paranoia, I guess. It really made me like question sanity and what's real and what's not because this voice in your head is talking back to you, but it's not like you're talking to yourself.
Yeah, exactly. That was something that I started in Vultures, even when it was like way back, even when it was still its own standalone book. I'd always thought that it was kind of I'm not going to call it a gimmick, but I just a tool for storytelling. I thought it was interesting that explored voices in your head and the whole idea of am I insane? Am I not? And it it just ended up being a very core part of all of the books, especially I would say in Parable and definitely in House of Weir. No spoilers.
All right. So how do you like, was it hard to get into that like mindset to do that, to write like that, or did it seem to come pretty naturally?
It came pretty naturally. I would say the most difficult part of it was just making sure that each of the voices felt unique and not like they would like, oh, this, the same syntax or whatever, just a different name for it. I wanted to make
To
sure
me,
that they all specific personality.
Yeah, I definitely felt that. I mean, to me, they definitely felt unique and like it's another completely separate person. I liked it a lot. Um, another thought or question, but we've got gods walking among people, celestials, architects. I was curious, are these just names for the same thing essentially? Just somebody else's maybe different terminology or something like that?
I mean, I leave it open to interpretation. My sort of hierarchy when I was writing it though was you had the Celestials at the top, and then Architect was just sort of I don't want to say a faction, more of a class in that sort of in that hierarchy.
Okay,
They're all essentially world builders, but it's to what extent?
gotcha. Okay. Uh, Varesh's consciousness, when I was reading that, I just like what I envisioned in my head was the Sorting Hat's voice from Harry Potter. Like that's what I heard.
I
Um,
think Sorting Hat was one inspiration for that. But did you ever play Diablo 3?
uh, I played Diablo 2 parts of it. Yeah, I think I played Diablo 3.
So when I initially came up with Vera's character and the standalone version of Shadow Twins, I initially introduced him as this very mouthy floating head, and the influence for that was Zoltan Cool from Diablo 3 because he first appears as this really kind of mouthy floating head, and I thought, oh, that would be fun to write, and it just kind of evolved from there.
Gotcha. I don't know if I remember a floating head in Diablo 3, but it's been a while since I played it. I played that. Was that the first one that was on like an Xbox or PlayStation or whatever?
I want to say yes. Yeah, I think
Okay.
it was.
I
That was
I
a
have a Diablo game, but I'm not sure if it's that one or not. I don't play too many video games, but uh yeah, I guess I was saying Varesh. I'm not sure how you said his name, but the consciousness trying to ask which one of them real was like really good. I thought, kind of going back to, having that argument in your head, but I it just ties in with that. That was some of my favorite stuff to read in the story. I don't know. It just was very interesting to me and just I wonder what it would feel like to like have that argument with yourself. Or maybe it's not yourself. There's something else in there. It's hard to say, but um, I guess maybe somebody who is schizophrenic or something can maybe relate to that a little bit more. I don't know if that was sort of any inspiration or anything like that, but yeah, it was cool to read.
it was his dialogue, especially with himself, is definitely one of my favorite parts to write, just because I enjoy the banter between them.
Yeah, it was fun to read.
And I think especially because his conscience is so so hard against him. So I can just kind of go all out with it and be as absurd as I need to.
But I mean, that's kind of fun when you can be that way. I would imagine as you're writing it, that's probably enjoyable. I didn't read this book probably as fast as I would have liked to. So like some of the stuff, like I jotted things down as I was reading it. So like this next point that I've got, just I really think you have a way with the words that you are writing. And I guess I don't remember specifically what was happening, and maybe just you'll be able to pick up the pieces with the second part of things. But Varesh talking with Sonia's ghost or spirit, just really heartbreaking. Um, and I don't really remember what was talked about at that point, but it obviously made an impact at that point with, probably late at night, I was laying in bed reading this book. Um, I should have been more specific, but I wasn't at the time.
No, I remember I think I remember the scene you're talking about. What did you have a particular question about it though? I completely misunderstood, I think.
Oh, just I guess it was more of a statement than anything. Just it was just heartbreaking to me. Uh, and I wish I was more specific so I could be more clear. But um, at the time I wasn't, so I don't really remember at that point. So I'm sorry, I'm not giving you much to go off of there.
Oh, that's fine. I think I was in a very weird headspace when I wrote this book. I've I think this was one of I think my pandemic book. I wrote this like right as the whole COVID-19 lockdowns had started. And so everything was a bit weird, and the book ended up being this weird experimental thing. I think my kids were like barely 2 months old. And so I was juggling a lot mentally and emotionally. Um, and somehow it worked.
It was a hard time, and yeah, I mean, I could imagine, you got a couple kids, couple months old, it
Yeah.
just makes it a lot harder. I mean, my kids were like in fifth and sixth grade, and so we're trying to do school from home and stuff, and you know, it was tough on everybody.
Oh, I imagined. I imagined it does not sound fun.
No. Um, I remember not too long ago you had a tweet saying that you had can't remember the term, uh, where you jumble the letters up together to form new words.
Oh, an anagram.
Anagram. You had an anagram in your new book, and you don't think anybody was going to find it. Um,
It's extremely obscure. Extremely obscure.
okay. And I saw that, and I was motivated by that because um, you're off Eleanor,
Mm.
one for all for
Yeah.
one. Um, I thought that was clever, and it took me a few times like reading it, seeing that phrase come up before I kind of caught on, and I'm like, oh, these look like it could be a different word. Um, so yeah, it's probably going to be tough, but I'm going to be like looking for that anagram like a hawk once I get to that House of Mirror.
The only hint I'll give people for this one, because it really is a tough one. It's relevant to Castlevania.
Oh shit, I don't know anything about that. I know it's a game, but that's not going to help me much then.
The
Uh,
funny about it though is I've had this anagram. I think I came up with it probably, I want to say probably 11 or 12 years ago, and finally had the chance to use it again.
so how? Okay, I guess without giving too much away on it, how did you like come up with it? It was just something, one day it just popped into your head.
Um, yes and no. So there was a phrase that I thought was really cool, and so I threw that specific phrase into an anagram generator, and it came out with something else, which I ended up using as a name for the character.
Oh, I didn't know there was anagram generators.
Uh,
I mean, I
so
shouldn't be surprised. I mean, there's anything on the internet, so
so Castlevania and a name. That is the biggest hint I will give.
all right. Well, I guess I'm gonna have to start Googling some Castlevania stuff and see if I recognize anything at some point then. The World Breaker Requiem. I loved Gefferax, the talking dog. Just at the beginning of that, we get introduced to this dog, and I just recently finished Blood Follows by Steven Erikson. Um, and the beginning part of Requiem reminded me a lot of Blood Follows, just because it felt like these novellas that Steven Erikson did seem just kind of like they're a little bit like absurd and just kind of like fun, like that type of thing. And that's kind of how I felt at the beginning of Requiem, and then as it kept going, it got more serious, or I felt like it did. Um, but I felt like it was very similar. And I know I picked up another Malazan reference in there. But have you read Malazan or no?
I have not read a single Malazan book. I think I got maybe 60 or 70 pages into Gardens of the Moon ages ago and had to put it down because my ADHD was going absolutely insane.
Okay.
But no, it is my intent to start reading the series at some point this year.
Well, you need a little help. I know a couple guys who can help you out.
I am curious though. You said there was a reference to Malazan that you caught.
Yeah, yeah. You have a title for one of the books in.
Oh, I think I don't know that I actually did that on purpose.
Oh, really? Okay. I was
Don't
wondering because I was curious because I felt like I'd seen you post online that you hadn't read it, and then as I'm reading, I see Toll the Hounds. I'm like, huh, that's interesting. And then I picked up the Tad Williams, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I haven't.
That one I did specifically. That one I did on purpose.
Okay, have you read those or no?
I have not, and I own the audiobook for the first one.
Okay. I think like when I was in ninth grade, I tried to start reading it. I found one of them in the library at school and realized it wasn't the first book. And then I found the first book, and I didn't make it very far at that point. But um, they're on the list to be read someday.
Yeah.
But I saw that and I was like, oh, that's really cool. And then yeah, not far after that was Toll the Hound. So
Yeah,
um,
both of them I have to read at some point.
there's just never enough time,
No, there isn't.
especially if you're a writer. I feel like there's probably less time. I feel like a lot of writers would maybe rather be trying to write than trying to read something. I don't know, but
Who knows? I'm similar.
what you got to find a middle ground. What kind of challenges did you have writing Parable and Requiem? I mean, I guess like throughout the whole process. I mean, did the stories end up where you thought they were going to, or did they change along the way?
Um, I want to say for Parable, it ended up basically the way I had sort of intended it to. The biggest challenge with that was actually just focusing and just putting words on the page without obsessing over the composition or the syntax or all of that because my whether to my detriment or not, I'm extremely particular about the rhythm in sentences. I have been that way basically since I started writing, and it's just one of those things that um, I'm just like hyper vigilant of. So with Parable, it was definitely just allowing myself, um, basically giving myself permission to write a horrible first draft and then revise it later. With Requiem, the story for this one ended up changing quite a bit, to the point that I had to push the release back by a year. And I think it ultimately ended up being a much better book than I had intended. I think I ended up cutting it, I basically cut it in half. It was a 100,000 word book, I think, when I had initially intended to publish it. Ended up chopping quite a bit of it. I think I got rid of probably two or three complete characters. So I had to go back and just kind of basically puzzle it from the start.
I imagine that could have been a challenge. I know, like that was probably the thing that I struggled most with the book was just you've got characters that are the same like people with different names, and
Yeah.
I kind of felt like in Parable before we get that reveal that that's happening, I was kind of wondering if that was going to
Mhm.
happen. So I had a little bit of an itch, but then it was just kind of like not like definitely not in a bad way, but it was just way more than I expected. And it really caught me off guard. It felt like it reminded me of like the Mission Impossible movies where you got like people just pulling masks off left and right. Um, that's kind of what it made me think of. But
Yeah, it definitely logistically was a bit. I took quite a few notes for Requiem because basically the entire series exists in a multiverse. So you have Requiem and Vultures have a very similar sort of starting point where you have a main character. They both start in the same city. There's parallel universes though. Same city, but sort of different structures. Two completely different characters, and they eventually both leave the city, but for completely different reasons. And journey ends up being very, very different. And I went into Requiem with the idea of, oh, what if I wrote Vultures but in a parallel universe? Like, how would that be different? Like, what could I do differently? What could I do with characters? What could I do with new characters? So it was very much an exercise in deviating while trying to sort of stay the same, if that makes sense.
it sounds like that must have been like pretty challenging. Like I don't know, like that I could take if it was me, I don't think I could take good enough notes to pull something like that off. Um, yeah. Um, sorry, I had something lined up in my head and I kind of lost it.
Uh,
Uh, one thing I was kind of wondering about, and you had it, it's, I guess I don't remember like the about you section of the book, but you were born in Hungary, correct? Or
Romania.
Budapest, Romania, sorry. And then you were adopted. I was curious, like, has that influenced your writing in any way? I mean, I guess have you gone back over to Romania? Um, I guess I don't know the circumstances of what happened, but and I can't relate by any means, but was that a part of your writing in any sense at all? Um, or using that to explore things, I guess. I don't really know how to word that very well. I'm sorry. I've been kind of thinking about that, but I don't know how to spit the words out in a good question.
Um, so yes and no. I have not been back to Romania. I would like to go at some point. But as far as the writing goes, I don't know that it's really ever, excuse me, that it's really ever bled into the writing too much. Requiem was sort of the exception, um, where you have Avaria having this very contentious relationship with his adoptive mother, who does not hate him. She's just obviously trying to give him the best life that she can, which you know by the end of the story. I had a very good relationship with mom, um, and so I think a part of me had always wanted to write a story that sort of explored like, oh, well, what would have happened if I had had, a contentious relationship as opposed to a non-contentious relationship. So I wanted to do that, but this was also, I would say, but probably this was probably me still definitely trying to cope with my mom passing. Because I mean, obviously losing a parent sucks, but it hit me really hard. And so this was one of those books that I used to just kind of try and navigate that.
I felt a lot of in both all three of the stories. I felt a lot of emotion and I some of it felt like there was like I felt like depressive feelings at times reading this, just putting myself in the shoes of these characters, and definitely wasn't always easy things to read. Um, yeah, that's how I felt with some of that. So I can imagine writing it um, it would not be easy either. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no, happy to. Writing Requiem almost put me back into therapy. I'll just put it that way.
Wow.
It was not an easy one.
You just did you like did it feel like you were forcing yourself to do it to write it? I guess again, I'm not really sure how to word that, but
No, in a way, it really did. I'm very happy with the final product, but I could not have been happier to finish writing this thing. It was
gotcha.
out of everything I've published, I'm proud of it, but it is the book that I had the least fun writing, but just kind of felt like I needed to write it and just get it out of the system.
Just so there's nothing like I guess like lingering or that type of thing.
Yeah, and I mean there still is, that lingering emotion, but this was just, I think, definitely the worst of it. It is a nightmare of a book. It is not for the faint of heart psychologically.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with that. So how I'm curious, not having read Vultures yet, how how do Vultures and House of Mir, how do they follow up these stories, or how do they interconnect?
So Vultures, even though I wrote it before I wrote Parable, is still impacted by the events of Parable in some ways. House of Muir starts to really see the events of Parable and Requiem sort of come into that, come, I guess, sort of start to converge upon universes or realities, if that makes more sense. And
I
I think,
imagine it's kind of a hard thing to answer without spoiling things too much.
yeah, because it's funny because when I started writing House of Muir, I didn't really intend for everything to start bleeding in, but it did, and I wrote House of Muir in a way that you don't necessarily need to have read Parable or Requiem for it to make sense. I try to sort of go over like the key um, plot points from those stories in a relevant way. But it's more informative if you read Parable and Requiem first, but it's not necessary.
Gotcha. So I know that book. I mean, that took was it like 6 years to get through.
Just about.
What so was it just like rewriting things? I guess uh, if you'd like to share, like what were the challenges there?
Um, so I started writing it very shortly after I finished Vultures, and I want to say I got probably two or three different initial drafts of about 20 to 30,000 words, and they just weren't. The story basically wasn't working for me, so I put it to the side and ended up finishing Parable and then writing Requiem. and publishing that at the end of 2021. 2022 came around, and I decided that I wanted to pick up House of Weir again and basically start from scratch. And at that point, um, some of the stuff that I'd written for Parable and Requiem felt a bit relevant to where I wanted to push the story. So I ended up, I think I wrote the first act in probably a month or two. So it came around pretty quickly, sent it off to beta readers, and then just kind of put the project to the side because I needed to write something else. So I wrote a novelette called A Cup of Tea at the Mouth of Hell, which I intended to just be this sort of lighthearted romp about Lucifer trying to find his missing tea kettle. And it ended up being the most emotionally devastating thing I've ever written. I think I'd say the vast majority of people who read this thing have ended up crying at some point. So it did its job. But getting back to House of Muir, I started writing very sporadically at the beginning of 2023. And by probably the close to the end of 2023, I just kind of decided, okay, I need to finish this. And I need to actually just focus on it because if I don't think I'm ever going to. Writing this thing nearly made me quit writing altogether. It was that much of a train wreck to put together. But I somehow ended up finishing it and publishing it in the last couple of weeks. But it was by no means easy. Just between having to take breaks, being dejected by sales numbers for Vultures, and saying, well, if people aren't buying book one, like what's the point of writing the second one? So I'm glad that I finished it. I think it's the best thing I've ever written. But it took a long time to get there.
Well, if you think it's the best thing you've written, I'm really excited to read it because I really love Parable and Requiem. I guess I can't like I can't imagine what that must. I would feel like it would be super frustrating. Like you said, you're writing sporadically. Just thinking about it, like if it were me, I feel like it would just be like gnawing at me. I
Yeah,
kind like I kind if I was gonna write something, I kind of have an idea. Like it would probably just be like a short story. It's not gonna be some mammoth thing, but like I kind of have an idea for a beginning. Not much after that, and it doesn't really like beat at me too much because I'm not really that serious about it. But like you got book one, and now you're working on book two, and I just feel like those emotions would be really hard to like handle. They like maybe I'm thinking like self-imposed pressure, like I got to do this, I got to do this, but maybe you're not in the mood, or
yeah.
things just
It
aren't working
definitely
at the moment, that type of thing.
self-imposed pressure. And the stupid thing about it is that I knew exactly where the story was going. Like I knew how it was ending. I just did not have the mental or emotional capacity to actually sit down and finish the damn thing.
I imagine it's got to be tough. I mean, you you got a day job too, and then
Yeah.
you want to spend time with your kids, your wife, and then you're like, oh well, I gotta write too, and uh, I don't know. You see things online, authors. I wrote X number of words today, and all this and that, and that'd be kind of
Yeah.
hard to deal with. Again, kind of some self-imposed pressure, I imagine. Just seeing what everybody else is doing and that type of thing. But I'm glad you got it done, and I'm looking forward to getting there. Not too far off. So, I did get a question from somebody here on Twitter. So, ZB Steel sent
I
me a
knew it was going to be.
question. Uh, so he said, I guess this is for both of us to answer. I'll ask you, you can answer first. I didn't really think about this because I didn't read the question right. Um, but he asked if you were organizing an anthology and you could pick three authors, dead or alive, to work with, who would they be? And I guess you didn't ask why, but maybe if you have a reason why you would pick those particular authors.
That's a really good question, and I honestly, much to Zach's dismay, I have no idea who the hell I would do it with. I'm also pretty sure I know why he was asking. I had a short story that I had submitted to Grimdark magazine earlier last year as part of their open submission and got this close to selling it. So now I have this story and I have no idea what the hell I want to do with it.
Oh, so you got something kind of in the bank then, huh? Or on the, I don't know. Yeah, there's something there that could be used, huh?
Yeah, so maybe an anthology, maybe something else. I honestly have no idea. Sorry, Zach. Can I get a
Um,
text if I know it?
is he local to you, or you guys live close to each other somewhat?
No, no, I'm out in California. I think Zach lives in Alabama, but we talk pretty frequently.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, well, about as far away as you can get from each other, then. Gotcha. All right. I guess I'm kind of in between, but um, three authors. Well, I think I think I would have to say Stephen Erickson, probably George Martin.
Mhm.
I don't know who the third one would be. Um, I guess maybe Robert Jordan. Those are like, and I'm not done with Malazan, but I've read a Game of Thrones, and Wheel of Time was like the first fantasy thing that I ever read. So those would probably be the three heavy hitters. And then maybe three indie authors. Well, I've only read four indie authors. I've read you, H.C. Newell, Christopher R. Brenning, and Mike Roberti. So I'd have all four of you guys for the indie anthology.
All right.
You can get put something together. You can get your story in there. I guess I don't have figure it out. But
Yeah. I've done one anthology before, and it's fun, but it is a lot of work to keep everything together.
I don't even know what kind of work would go into it, to be honest. I guess, but
Oh, yeah, no, a lot of it's the editing, getting the cover art ready, the formatting. I did none of that for the anthology, but I salute the people who do or who did.
it's like I see, they come up every so often. I don't know that I have any right now, but I know I've got one coming from Kickstarter and Unavowed, and then I think there's another one that's going to be popping up sometime soon, like a dragon themed one.
Yeah, I think I know. I know of both of those. I think
I'm not sure when the other one's coming up, but yeah.
there's a lot of them
So,
nowadays.
yeah, and it sucks because I definitely buy books faster than I can read them. So
That's definitely a problem.
I mean, it could be drugs, so
That's
it's
a good
not.
point.
Um, Maybe just a couple fun questions here. Like what are you reading now? What are you watching? What are you listening to? Music, otherwise, podcast, whatever.
What am I reading now? I am slogging through Wind and Truth, the fifth
Okay.
Stormlight. Um, it's long, it's dense. It's not exactly the fastest paced thing, but I think I'm enjoying it so far.
How
Well,
far into it are you?
I would like to say I'm maybe a fifth of the way through, but I could be completely wrong.
Well, it's like 1,400 pages, right?
Yeah, I'm doing so I'm reading it, but I'm also listening to the audiobook when I'm not reading the physical copy. And I think I was like 18 hours in, but the audiobook for this fucking thing is like 62, 63 hours.
I've I've read the first three via audiobook. I haven't held the book and read them, but I've listened to them on audiobook. I haven't read Rhythm of War yet. Um, I think from what I remember, because this was a few years ago, I think Words of Radiance was my favorite of those three so far.
That seems to be the general consensus among, I think, the vast majority of people have said Words of Radiance is probably the best one in the series. I think I'm still inclined to agree with that.
I would like to, I mean, I'll reread them at some point, but I think I'd like to. I haven't read like Mistborn or any of the, I haven't read any of his other stuff, so I think I'd like to do like some sort of mixed reading order of that stuff, just to get a different experience with it.
I like Sanderson. The only problem I have is he has obviously he has Robert Jordan syndrome. I don't need 4 pages of description for an item of clothing or whatnot.
Okay. I don't remember a lot of that in the first three, but I've seen kind of a mixed bag of things on Wind and Truth from people so far.
Yeah, well, I'll see how I feel about it when I get to the end, which will hopefully be sometime soon, but who knows? Um, what am I watching nowadays? I think the most recent thing I watched was the Penguin series on HBO.
Was that good?
It is one of the best things I've seen done TV. Colin Farrell, like that whole cast is phenomenal. The show itself is just great. 11 out of 10, frankly.
Really? Okay. Because I really liked the movie with the new Batman movie. I really liked that, and I haven't watched the Penguin yet. I kind of have just honestly forgotten about it, but that's good to know that it's good. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. What else? I honestly, I really hardly watch any TV. So I think between that and probably just doing my rewatch of Castlevania before the new season comes out, that's probably kept me occupied TV wise. And then as far as listening, doing the audiobook, what am I listening to music? Mostly just a lot of Sleep Token and Lights lately. That seems to just be my general vibe. Nothing too heavy.
I've never heard of Lights. That's what you
She's
said, Lights?
Yeah, yeah, she's been around for a while. She's wasn't really my type of music when she started out, but as I have grown older, I have come to appreciate the poppier stuff more. But she's kind of all over the place, more sort of pop or electronic, kind of folksy in a sort of way.
All right.
So
I'll
it's
check it out then. Yeah, I've not heard of it.
nice to change it up a bit. But yeah, musically, that's mostly what I'm listening to these days.
Cool. Um, well, maybe the last thing I can think of here for you, unless you've got anything else, but I guess what's coming up for you? What are you working on, if anything? Just taking a break for now?
I've sort of been taking a break the last few weeks. I've got ideas for a couple of non-Shadow Twins and adjacent monster things, but nothing super concrete. My plan for this year probably is to just dive back into the next book, which I think I've mentioned this a couple times. I'm either going to have one more book in the series or two more. It just depends on multiple factors, I guess. I didn't want to have a third book end up being this giant thing. I didn't want to George R. Martin myself into a corner. So
Fair.
I I will have a better idea of where things are going once I actually start writing. But this series is not going to be anything longer than 4 books.
it's hard for me to say that that's manageable as somebody who's never written anything in their life, but I mean, it sounds manageable, right? It's not like you got this 15 book thing going on, and
I hope it's manageable. I think it probably is.
it sounds like it is. It sounds reasonable. Like you said, you haven't written yourself into a corner and not put a book out in 13, 14 years. So,
We'll see. There's a room for firsts.
well, I I feel like I've kind of run through all the questions that I can think of. I don't really have anything else popping in my head right now. Um, Anything else you've got? Um, yes, where can people find your books? Where can people find you? All that type of good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you can find my books on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, kind of wherever. If you want to find me online, I'm on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Twitter primarily.
I mean, I guess like this is where I don't know if I follow you on Blue Sky. I'm not on that super often, but I'll have to double check. Um, yeah, anything else you can think of?
Oh God.
So
Not
I'm putting the pressure on you here. Sorry.
yeah. Don't drink and drive. Do not drink coffee before getting on the 405. That's solid advice.
Sounds good. Well, Luke, uh, I guess I'm not sure how long we've been going here, probably close to an hour or thereabouts. I appreciate your time here. I've enjoyed reading your book a lot. I'm looking forward to getting into Vultures here. Probably sometime soon. I'm gonna jump to a different book and then I'll probably come back to Vultures after that. Um, and hopefully if you're open to it, I'd love to talk to you again once I finish that book.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I will let you go. Enjoy the rest of your evening here. Have a good weekend and thank you again for your time. It means a lot.
You too, man. Thank you for having me.
No problem.
Take it easy.
You too. Bye.